Seems like we're not the only ones who want to meet the boogeyman.
We are talking Redwood Massacre, Annihilation. This one is directed and written by David Ryan Keith. And it's actually a sequel to the 2014 slasher movie, Redwood Massacre. Confusingly, there's another horror movie also called Redwood, which is about vampires. Nothing to do with this one. This one stars Danielle Harris and Damien Puckler. And what we have here, we have a sequel where, in this universe, obviously the original movie has happened, and now a number of years later, a group of people who are relatives of one of the victims from the first movie, along with this kind of mysterious stranger who seems to be a fanboy of this original kind of serial killer, decide they're going to go try and hunt down and get the answers they so desperately seek. So off they go into the woods to discover an abandoned military compound, which may not be quite as abandoned as one would think. So, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So, like I've said, I haven't seen the first movie, so I'm not familiar with the obviously what happened in that one. But having not seen it, I have to say I didn't have a problem watching this movie. It kind of explains it well enough, I think, so you can watch it as a kind of a completely kind of separate entity. Maybe you'll get a little bit more from it if you have watched the first one. But what did I like, first of all? I actually think for a slasher movie, it has a somewhat original concept in the fact that this is not a slasher stalking victims. This is, you know, the victims really going to proactively try and find the actual slasher. So, you know, it all boils down to ultimately the same effect when it comes down to it. But nonetheless, that kind of element I found interesting because these guys are not going ill prepared. They're armed. They've got a professional kind of like soldier with them. And the other interesting thing here is, of course, this kind of serial killer fanboy, the slasher fanboy. Now, he's dangerous in his own regard. I kind of really won't tell you too much about that. But again, it's an interesting kind of little original idea in this tired slasher genre. But I quite liked it because you do get those, you know, those people who write to like pen pals or kind of women who seem to fall in love with convicted serial killers and stuff like that. Is something that happens. So it does seem like it's conceivable that something like that would be the case if there was this kind of mysterious sort of slasher. So when we get to our killings, I would say you won't be disappointed. They are plenty of kind of fairly gory deaths here, and people dispatched in a number of kind of gruesome ways. The body count isn't massive, I would say, but what they do have here is they have some fantastic set dressing. So when we find our killer's lair, shall we call it, you'll find absolutely tons and tons of corpses, body parts, things like that. So it looks really gruesome. So even though we don't really have a huge body count on screen here, it kind of, you know, it almost makes up for it to a certain degree. Now, the opening is also pretty strong, the kind of the prologue, if you like, which will kind of give you kind of a brief introduction to this kind of killer, before we kind of get into our main story. That's also fairly strong there. And I quite like the actors here, and I quite like their kind of like their characters. I don't think the acting is necessarily brilliant, but I think the characters were quite fun. I mean, some are obviously cannon fodder, but nonetheless, I quite liked it. And the mythology about the origin of this killer, I also thought was quite interesting, and is a little different to, again, I think a lot of the kind of like the kind of horror films that you have that will feature, you know, quote unquote supernatural kind of slashers. I actually thought they've done something a little different here, and again points to a larger, wider world here without maybe other things that may be connected to it. And in fact, there's a shot here that directly references other completely unrelated film, so that was an interesting little addition there. What doesn't work? You know, yes, I mean, I gotta be honest, I like the characters, but some of the acting is a little cheesy. I don't think it's to the point where people will care, necessarily. It's good enough, I think, to appeal to the lower budget, you know, slasher movie fans, but if we're kind of being objective here, yeah, the acting isn't the best, and the dialogue is suitably kind of hokey and cheesy at times. I think the biggest crime that this movie does is we have way too long time until we actually see our first real kill on screen, which is by our killer, you know, that is to do with the story. We have the kind of the prologue at the beginning. There's a couple of other things that I kind of won't mention, but our killer really doesn't show up. The Redwood killer, whatever he's called, the burlap killer, I think it is, doesn't show up until 70 minutes into the movie, and he had his first kill then. To me, it was a little bit too long to wait, and considering the body count is relatively low to begin with, I think maybe that would possibly be somewhat of a detriment to the film and how people would view it. There are a few plot threads here that seem to be introduced and then completely dropped. For example, when we have our group of explorers go into the woods, they come across a group of campers, and you think, oh, okay, well, these campers are clearly going to be cannon fodder. You know, that's going to be the cannon for the late introduced characters that are going to get slaughtered to up the body count. Nope, they're never seen again. In fact, we don't even see them. We just hear the kind of like the noise that they're making, and our characters talking about it. I think, why? What was the point of even introducing that? You know, it seems again just a little bit kind of like a bit of a waste of opportunity here. So it ultimately comes down to a kind of a fun movie. I enjoyed it to a point. I'm not the biggest slasher fan, I'm going to say that right up the front, but I think because I feel this movie introduced enough new elements, and I enjoyed the set design, and I thought the characters, although they weren't particularly, you know, believable to a certain degree, I still found them quite fun and entertaining. So I'm actually going to give this one a slightly above average mark. I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10 because I had fun with it. I enjoyed it. I was invested. And even though I think this movie has its shortcomings, and I feel maybe it's maybe a little bit light on kind of on content to a certain degree. I think nonetheless it's still entertaining. There are a couple of kind of scenes that will one in particular I think is pretty shocking, which actually doesn't involve this Redwood killer, but I don't want to kind of spoil it for you. But I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen the first one? What did you think of it? Will you see the second one, which is coming out, I think, on Halloween in 2020? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.